wanted to bring today's episode to the podcast talking all about the lipid panel. We're doing a deep dive into cholesterol, triglycerides, LDL, HDL, what all of this means for your fertility. And so, although sometimes medication may be part of the equation, we're looking at those targeted diet and lifestyle factors to really help support healthy cholesterol and some factors as to why your cholesterol may be off. Even if you've been told your cholesterol panel or your lipid panel is fine, functional reference ranges. These are for people that are, this is optimal levels. So you may be told it's normal, but maybe from a functional standpoint, it's not. We see this all the time, and we're specializing in premature ovarian insufficiency, diminished ovarian reserve, low AMH, and high FSH. Excited for you to listen to this episode. Let's go. Hey there, I'm Sarah Clark, founder of Fab Fertile and your host. I believe the functional approach is the first step for anyone struggling with infertility, and my aim is to help you get pregnant naturally. Today, I'm welcoming Katy Bradbury back to the podcast, and we're digging into the lipid panel and what you need to know when you are trying to conceive. Katy's part of my team here at Fab Fertile. She's our clinical advisor. She's an integral part of our couples coaching program, which uses functional lab testing, diet, and lifestyle changes to dramatically improve conception. So if you're struggling with infertility, your body is desperately trying to tell you something, and focusing on your health will either help you get pregnant naturally, or if you do need to go to the fertility clinic, it will help you improve your chances of success. Katy is a registered nurse and nutritional therapist from the UK, and her mission is to improve women's health and improve their chances of having healthy babies and raising happy children. Having experienced your own struggles with fertility, a traumatic birth, and bonding issues, Katy knows just how important this support is. Thanks so much for listening. I'm so thankful that you're here. Make sure you hit subscribe or follow. And if you know someone else who is on the fertility journey, please share this podcast with them. Hey, Katy, excited to have you back on the podcast.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah. Today we're going through the exciting topic, and it is actually a really exciting topic because it's, although sometimes we just think, here's our blood chemistry and kind of what we're presented with, and we might not know what it all means. Today we're digging into the lipid panel and really what this means when you're on the fertility journey, and really for have you look at this completely differently at these different markers and ways to help you with targeted diet and lifestyle changes to help improve your numbers, which then helps to improve the chances of pregnancy success. So definitely check out Katy's episode we did on the vaginal microbiome. That's super informative. And so let's dig into, what are some the optimal lipid markers for pregnancy success in men and women? And we'll go deeper into this a little bit later, but just sort of generally to start.
Yeah, sure. So when we look at blood work, when any Fab Fertile clients come to look at blood work, we always, as part of our workup, we always look at a full lipid panel. And so if we just look at cholesterol on its own, it's not like that great of a marker because it's like a total and it doesn't break it down into the different constituents. So overall, when we're looking at cholesterol, so your listeners, I'm sure, will probably know by now that at Fab Fertile, we're always thinking about things, especially in blood work, where we're thinking about the functional ranges, right? Instead of the typical Western ranges that might be if you went to your doctor or if you had investigations done at a hospital, then their reference ranges are going to look a little different. The main reason for that is because they are looking for the presence or absence of disease. But we want more for you than that. And we don't just want the presence or absence of disease. We want things to be functioning optimally. And especially if you've already got issues with fertility, then we're wanting things to be as optimal as possible. So when we talk about the functional ranges, we're really thinking about the optimal ranges. And so from a thinking about the US units, because they are measured differently across the globe, and here in the UK, the units of measurement are slightly different. But the US units for cholesterol, we're thinking about milligrams per deciliter. And so really the functional ranges for cholesterol as an overarching is about 170 to 200 milligrams per deciliter. And then if we dig a little bit further into that and think about the HDL, which is the high density lipoproteins, ideally we want that to be sitting around the 55 to 85 mark. And for the LDL, the low density lipoproteins, we want that to be sitting roughly about the 80 to 100. And for the triglycerides, which is just really a type of fat that is found in the bloodstream, in terms of the functional ranges, which may look very different to the Western ranges, we're thinking about between 70 and 80 milligrams per deciliter. Now, some of these markers you might have been told or might have thought about in the past, to your listeners anyway, as having them lower equals better. But I'm sure we'll come to talk a lot more in this episode about why that might not be the case.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's just talk about, first of all, the standard conventional approach. Actually, before I get into that, definitely check out, for the listeners, go and check out the episode we did on blood chemistry. So we're here not to diagnose, but to educate. There's a whole deep dive into the whole entire panel that we look at for blood chemistry. So today we're doing the deep dive on cholesterol and lipids. But let's talk about, if sort of your cholesterol or your lipids are out of balance, the standard recommendation for a conventional approach, and then the functional approach, and why it's different.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting, Sarah, because there's such a discrepancy, or there can be such a discrepancy. The Western medical world is starting to catch up. Some aspects of it are starting to catch up now, but lots of the recommendations that we see coming from doctors from the Western medical sphere are completely well-meaning, but are ones where they're perhaps a little bit, especially in terms of the dietary recommendations, perhaps a little bit old school. And back in the sort of 1950s, 60s, 70s, there was a huge drive away from fat. So fat became really feared, didn't it? And fat was bad. Saturated fat was, something to be avoided at all costs. And really, it began this fad that lasted decades and still hangs around, of low fat being better. And people still come to me believing that to be true to this day, despite the evidence, so much of the evidence now pointing in a different direction. So we always need to change our thinking, and sometimes in the medical world it takes a long time to catch up. So saturated fat, so that would be the typical advice: saturated fat, avoid saturated fat, and possibly also get you on some statins, some medications. So statins are one of the most commonly prescribed medications. I think I was reading a statistic earlier that said that I think it was like 1 in 4 adult Americans is on a statin, which is a bit mind-blowing. And again, this is just to reiterate what you said before, Sarah, like this is for information. This is not to say, oh, if you're on statins, go and stop taking your statins, because, for some people, they're a completely appropriate option. But what I do find is that sometimes people are, if they've got, certainly the model in the UK here is, if someone goes to their GP or to their practice nurse to have their blood pressure measured or their cholesterol measured, and it comes up as high, there will be something that flags up on their system, on the doctor's system, as a part of a public health drive from Public Health England to say, okay, well, we will give you funding, we will give this GP funding if a statin is prescribed. And it's all got a bit hairy, I think, because it's just meant that people go on autopilot, and that I think that statins are overprescribed, and they were deemed as this wonder drug, and they certainly have a place for some people, but they're often, in my experience, prescribed without much a look at the diet and lifestyle piece, and without much thinking about, well, why is this happening in the first place? Like, how can we just prevent it? And so that's what I see in my practice.
Yeah, it's that BandAid approach, right? And so you can still, like, maybe if you have a thyroid issues, you may need thyroid medication. Maybe if you're dealing with low hormones, you may need bioidenticals, but it's also, in conjunction with that, making those targeted diet and lifestyle changes. And sometimes the goal is to get off of it, other times not, for like thyroid, but it's doing all of it. And sometimes we just say, here's the drug, and then off we go, and we forget about making all those changes. So let's sort of do a little deeper dive there on cholesterol. So if the cholesterol is out of balance, what could be some reasons for it being high, being low? And again, we're not diagnosing. These are themes. So it's not like, oh my goodness, you like diagnosing and you have this. No, when we look at your blood chemistry, we're looking at themes, looking at the functional testing. We have access to functional testing. We ship it worldwide. And then also looking at a health history. So it's the themes that we're seeing. And what are those missed healing opportunities, which is empowering, because many times when you get that fertility diagnosis, it's like we myopically focus on it. We think there's nothing we can do, like myself with, POI, premature ovarian insufficiency. I didn't know there's all these other missed healing opportunities. And I, was told, sorry, you're doomed. Your only chances of conception are with donor eggs. And so we see all the time these missed healing opportunities, and people with diagnoses, they've gone through multiple failed IVFs, IUIs, tried naturally for at least 2 years, and they are getting pregnant naturally. Or when they do go to IVF, they get pregnant with their own eggs. So let's go into these markers and kind of, sort of some themes that we could extrapolate from here.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I really like about cholesterol as a panel, the lipid panel that we've just spoken about, one of the things I really like about that is because I see it as a nice gateway into what might be going on in the rest of the body. And it's one of those sets of markers whereby if there is an imbalance somewhere in the body, often it's the cholesterol that we'll see going out of range, right? And so it's like, oh, okay, like, right, the cholesterol is out of range. Let's do some digging. And so, as you say, it doesn't mean, oh, this is definitely the case, that's definitely the case. It just means, oh, okay, we know that there are like 10, 15, 20 things that could be influencing this. Let's dive in. And the kind of things that might influence it, absolutely diet. That would always be my first thought, right? So diet. And contrary to previous beliefs, it's not eating the fats. It's not necessarily eating foods that contain cholesterol. Like loads of people were like, oh, avoid egg yolks, for example, because of the cholesterol. It's not eating egg yolks that are going to make your cholesterol imbalanced. Although eating lots of pro-inflammatory fats may well do. So, when we're thinking about fats in the diet, we do need to be really cautious and really careful, because fats can either be wonderful for our body and act as fuel and act as the precursors for all sorts of fabulous systems working optimally in our body, or they can be really a pro-inflammatory driver and cause all sorts of problems. So absolutely, if you're having the kind of fats where you're having fast food burgers and fries all the time, then those probably aren't the right fats for you. But if you're having fats in the form of whole fats, like whole foods, whether that's plant foods or animal fats that have had a good from animal fats, a good organic, a good happy life, then absolutely those are likely to be the right types of fats for you. But more commonly than fats as a driver for dietary cholesterol issues is imbalances with blood sugars. So more often than not, we see that someone who has perhaps high cholesterol, high LDL and low HDL and high triglycerides, that's a pattern that we often see. And often you'll speak to that person and you'll do a bit of digging, and they will be really, really reliant on carbohydrates, or on refined carbohydrates and sugars, and have those real sugar cravings. And we know that they're on a blood sugar roller coaster. And that can be a massive driver for those cholesterol markers being out of balance. And so when we get that picture of blood sugar imbalances plus the cholesterol being out of whack, then we're starting to think, oh, is there a cardiovascular disease risk going on here? And so then, we're not just thinking about it from a fertility point of view, because we want to be reducing inflammation and making sure that inflammation is in check to promote a healthy, fertile body. But we're also concerned about that person's future, right? We want to be safeguarding them against future cardiovascular disease risk. Of course we do. And so we always will be having those conversations with people. Some of the other things that can impact cholesterol imbalances, and I'm sure we'll delve into some of these shortly, but things such as our gut microbiome, the way our liver functions, even our sex hormones being out of balance. So our primary function for cholesterol in the body is to produce sex hormones and also to produce bile acids to help us absorb fat and to synthesize vitamin D as well. So lots of really good functions there.
Yeah. So some of the themes we see. So we see that, with the blood sugar issues, and this is something we discuss in our weekly clinical meetings with our team. So the blood sugar, on a roller coaster, which then can impact the lipids. And then we also see cholesterol being low because of people being afraid of that. This was me for years. Like, let me have the low fat yogurt, which the dairy was impacting my, because I have a sensitivity to dairy, but all that low fat was like pounding with all kinds of sugar, which then impacted my blood sugar. So, people being afraid. So the cholesterol being low, and hormones are the building blocks of, fat is the building blocks of hormones. And you want to make sure that you have adequate amount of fat. So you talk about that kind of pattern that we see with lower cholesterol?
Yeah, absolutely. So really important point when we're thinking about fertility clients. So all of our steroid hormones, so that includes testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, and a whole bunch of other different co-hormones, if you like, are, as you say, they are all directly derivative of cholesterol. So they need the precursor to all of those is cholesterol. And so we need to have, cholesterol is not something to be scared of. Yes, we want it to be in balance. That's in balance, not imbalanced. But we do need to make sure that we have enough of it, because otherwise we just can't produce enough of the sex hormones, which is a critical part of the equation when it comes to making babies. So the fear of fats has stuck around, and I think that often I certainly here in the UK, I often get people who are coming to me and they have spent years and years in, like, as members of part of the popular diet clubs. So we have a number of like really popular diet clubs here in the UK, and ultimately the way that and they have you enter all your food into an app and this kind of thing, right? And you have points, and a certain number of points a day you have to stick with him. And the way that they do that essentially is by minimizing the calories through fats. That's the main way that they get people to stay below a certain calorie threshold. And so I get people coming to me, and in Fab Fertile as well, right? We get people coming to Fab Fertile saying, hang on, like, I'm doing all the right things. I'm eating low fat. I'm not, I'm avoiding all of these foods that I know I shouldn't be having. And we look at their blood markers, we look at their cholesterol. Perhaps we might look at a hormone, do some hormone testing with them as well. And everything's on the floor. And it's like, dude, you're not even fueling, you're not even putting the right things in your body to create these sex hormones in the first place. And so the kind of fats that we would get those from are, just think like, if something is whole and pure, so olives are a great source of healthy fats, so omega-9s from olive and pure extra virgin olive oil. So again, olive oil is a complicated one. Standard olive oils off the supermarket shelf are likely to be mostly mixed oils and have probably been heat treated. But if you're having a cold pressed single source extra virgin olive oil, then that is fantastic fantastic for your cholesterol and for your health and your sex hormone production. And things like avocados and even like even some of the saturated fats like coconut oil, and as I say, fats that come from animal produce that has been organically and grass fed, etc. So it's often one where people, the low fat yogurt is such a classic, and it's such a bugbear of mine when people are like, oh yeah, I eat the low fat yogurt, and it's like, how do you think they make it taste good? Like, they add so much rubbish to it in an attempt to make it taste creamy after they've taken all the fat out, and it's just like, why do that to yourself? It would be so much better, if depending on whether dairy is an issue for you, if you did eat dairy, it would be so much better to eat a full fat yogurt compared to a low fat yogurt, 100%.
Absolutely. And so we see that the low cholesterol, we could see elevated triglycerides. So what are some themes there we see with that? What could be potential underlying factors?
Yeah. So again, with the triglycerides, this is one of the markers where, generally speaking, healthcare providers will say, oh, well, the lower the triglycerides, the better. But what we know to be true is that the triglycerides can act as a source of fuel, but they are also indicated. So like if the triglycerides were low, for example, it could be an indicator that there is some kind of fat malabsorption going on somewhere along the line, and you may not necessarily know if you've got fat malabsorption. So it sounds like a bit of a scary term, but ultimately, I think really important to note that that digestive health always comes first. So in Fab Fertile, I know that you guys do stool testing with everyone. We always look at the gut, as an integral part of health, and optimizing digestion is a big part of that. But because of the cholesterol being a big part of the synthesis of bile acids, which is what helps us to actually absorb the fat, the fat from our food, whether that's good fat or bad fat, the triglycerides being low could be a sign that there is some fat malabsorption going on. So if you had someone coming in and they had like the low triglycerides, and then they also had low levels of some of the fat soluble vitamins like vitamin D, vitamin A, then you might be thinking, especially if that person did have a great exemplary diet where they did include lots of good fats in their diet, you might be wondering, actually, do we need to be optimizing their digestion to help them actually absorb these fats in the first place?
Now let's just talk about HDL, kind of again, these are themes, we're not diagnosing. So themes that you'd see with high versus low HDL.
Yeah, so HDL, I mean, it's to be honest with you, it's very rare that I would ever see it particularly elevated. HDL is seen as the good cholesterol. So generally speaking, we want that to be in a good number. As I said before, ideally the functional range that we like to see is 55 to 85 milligrams per deciliter. So if it's low, then, as I say, this is like the type of cholesterol that is deemed as the good cholesterol. And again, this could be because there is issues going on with fat malabsorption. It could be because there is some liver stuff going on. So it could be that there's a bit of strain going on in the liver. And we always look at liver markers as well. So we would always consider the lipid panel along with. So if we saw that HDL being low, for example, then we might say, okay, our eyes might go to the liver panel and see what is going on with some of those liver markers. Are there signs that the liver might be, a bit overworked? And the same with the thyroid, right? So the our cholesterol markers and the thyroid are very much linked. So your eyes might then go to the thyroid panel to say, what's going on there? And this is what I mean as I think with the cholesterol panel and the lipid panel, I tend to look at it collectively rather than specifying on one marker over another. So I just think, if the HDL was looking low, then, as I say, I'd be looking at all of these other things to say what's actually going on here. Why is it low? And the same for is there any oxidative stress going on in the body? So are there things like heavy metals? Are there toxins that we don't know about going into this person, whether that's coming from mold, metals, or pollution, plastics, anything else that could be causing this cellular oxidative stress? Because what we must remember is that the lipids form a part of our cell wall. So every single cell in our body is lined with fat, it's lined with lipids, and it's called the lipid membrane. And so if there's any issues with oxidative stress, then those lipid membranes can become damaged. And that's when we get a problem, because it means that our cells can't talk to each other as well. And it means that our hormones and our other chemical messages can't be given out and received as well. So we always look at things in the context of oxidative stress as well.
And then the LDL one, we're typically seeing that. What are we seeing, like, as far as themes there, more high?
Yeah, so if the LDL is high, the first thing, as I said, the first thing that I would think about is this person like totally addicted to sugar? Is this person on this blood sugar roller coaster where they're having to rely on sugary foods or refined carbs like chips and all of those things, because it's not just sugar, it's any of those beige foods, right? So are they reliant on those beige foods? Are they when they get to 4 p.m, are they feeling like super shaky and super hangry? Like, are they getting these real dips in their blood sugars across the day? So I'd always be really investigating into their refined carbohydrates, and also then looking at a different part of the blood panel, which we look at, if like the glucose levels, the HbA1c, and the insulin. So those would be the markers that I would cross associate mainly with the LDL.
Anything else you wanted to say on the panel, on the lipid panel at this stage?
No, I think that mostly covers what we look at.
Awesome. Okay, so let's talk about the reasons for these things to be out of balance. So this is sort of the where we can dig deeper. It's not like, here it is, let's take a statin, or here it is, we're doomed. Let's look for the reasons why, and this is our whole Fab Fertile method, our whole approach. Okay, so the first one is, then we talked a little bit about metabolic dysfunction. What are we seeing there?
Yeah, so when we're thinking about metabolic imbalances, we're thinking about the ways in which the body generates energy, and the ways in which the body is able to fuel itself. And when we're thinking about metabolism, there's so many systems in the body that are linked in with this, right? And so it's coming back to always coming back to the diet first and foremost, and the ways in which we can utilize the diet to make sure that those metabolic signs are as in alignment as possible, is by eating a diet that is rich in like fiber, right? So fiber is so underrated, and it's still to this day one of the probably the single biggest driver in one way or another in terms of metabolic dysfunction. So when we're thinking about fiber, we're really thinking about any kind of plant food. I know lots of people think fiber and they think like whole grains and like, the kind of cereals and this kind of thing. Actually, my favorite sources of fiber are just from fruit and vegetables. So, if we're eating if we're eating plants in their whole form, then we're going to be having a diet rich in fiber, and the fiber is a real generator in terms of the metabolic side of the cholesterol.
Yeah, so metabolic, you could have high blood pressure and high blood sugar, and then excess body fat around the waist. And so again, it's let's dig deeper. And the thing that we see a lot with our clients, and we're typically, focusing on low AMH and high FSH, diminished ovarian reserve, premature ovarian insufficiency, is we see these viral infections and H. pylori. So that's impacting your stomach acid. So you can eat this really healthy diet, but maybe your body's not absorbing those nutrients. So we need to do something to address those infections, because you could eat the most beautiful diet in the world, but if you got an infection going on, and we see H. pylori being passed back and forth between partners, it's very contagious. And so, what's anything you wanted to say there about infections and how that impacts the lipids and more?
Yeah, it's just to say really that in terms of this concept that I spoke about at the start of cholesterol being a bit of a gatekeeper for the rest of health, we know that cholesterol will always respond to what is going on in the rest of the body. So if the thyroid is low, research has told us that if the TSH in the thyroid is a bit elevated, then that can drive up LDL, this kind of bad cholesterol that we've spoken about, right? Same with infections. If we have these kind of chronic infections, whether that's from H. pylori or anything else, then that can drive up that LDL. So it's when the body senses that it's under strain, whether that's from diet, from that blood sugar dysregulation, whether it's from infections like H. pylori, whether it's from the heavy metals and this kind of thing, then it will drive up that LDL, because the body feels like it's under threat, and it's just, it's a natural response from our body.
And then, leaky gut. So if you've had chronic stress, be it dealing with fertility or just life in general, chronic stress can impact the health of your gut, which then the body mounts an immune response to all your favorite foods. You end up doing a food sensitivity test, and all your favorite foods are lit up. So chronic stress, antibiotic use, which was the case for me and many of the clients we work with, is that antibiotics are sort of an atomic bomb going off in the body, and then predisposes you to the leaky gut. And then also hormonal birth control. So that can then predispose you to leaky gut and more. So those things can then impact, can be a factor potentially in a lipid imbalance. Anything you wanted to say there?
Yeah, absolutely. So the leaky gut piece that you mentioned is so when the gut is permeable. So when the gut we want the gut to be permeable to some extent, because we want some things to be able to go in and out of the gut. But what we don't want is this constant barrage of things coming in, whether that's from foods that we become intolerant to, whether it's from any of the things that you mentioned, including the antibiotics, etc. And when that does happen, we think of like the gut wall as having these fingers, like villi we call them, right? And so when those barriers, and they have barriers in between them, and when those barriers are broken, it can let things out into the bloodstream that can promote inflammation. One of the biggest drivers that links in with cholesterol as well, in terms of the inflammatory piece in the gut, is the gut microbiome. And so we know that if there is an abundance of bacteria in the gut that are called gram-negative bacteria, anaerobic bacteria, then they can be pro-inflammatory in nature, and they're pro-inflammatory because they produce a substance called lipopolysaccharides, and the clue is in the name, right? Lipo, so that we're thinking about fats. And so when we've got a load of LPS, lipopolysaccharides, being released into the bloodstream, which is going to be heightened if the gut integrity is not sound, then that is going to be driving up inflammation, driving up that LDL, and showing us this picture of metabolic dysfunction.
And another one we see, and this is majority of the couples we work with, there's something going on with the thyroid. So either hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's typically rather than Graves', and then subclinical thyroid. So it is issues, not the thyroid itself, it's the liver, the gut. And so the relation potentially with cholesterol and triglycerides being elevated for the triglycerides may be an indicator. Also, sometimes we'll see over on the thyroid panel that there's a correlation there with poor thyroid function. Anything you wanted to say there?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, it's just this notion that the cholesterol links up with everything else that happens in the body, and so the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland helps to regulate cholesterol, and so as such, when our bodies are so the TSH, the top level thyroid hormone that we look at, which comes from the pituitary gland, if we look at the TSH and that is elevated, it's usually a sign that, again, like there's something awry, there's something going on in the body, because it's the brain telling your thyroid, like, come on, up your production of thyroid hormone, you're not doing enough. And if that happens, then that can, in turn, the body is then in this state of alert, right? Because it's like, we're not in homeostasis right now, something's got to happen, something's got to change. So the TSH goes up, the thyroid is kind of on overdrive, and as such, again, the triglycerides can go up, and the LDL can go up as well. So it's this picture where all the systems link together. So unlike what we might see in a hospital setting, I'm a nurse by background. So what I always saw in a hospital was when someone's blood markers were out of range, it was like, oh, well, we need to call a hematologist for this. We need to call the gynecologist for this. We need to call this person. It's like, okay, like, where's the person that links these together? And so we're not just a single system in the body, we are a whole set. And I guess part of the reason that I don't necessarily love the whole, like, even like the concept of naming diseases to be certain things, like, yes, it's helpful to categorize things, but really it's what's going on underneath the surface. What are the drivers for that person? And so we always need to think, if any of these markers are out of balance, what is going on for that person? Like, where can we find the drivers and how can we fix those?
Yeah, the conventional side can be very siloed, or you've got all these different specialists and no one's actually, as you say, looked at the person.
Yeah.
Okay, so toxins. So we see heavy metals being arsenic, uranium from water, and way more. We're looking at a hair tissue mineral analysis test to actually determine heavy metals, and so that can then be an impact, can impact cholesterol. What are we seeing there?
Yeah, so it's exactly the same. I'm going to, at risk of sounding like a broken record here, Sarah, but it's, when we're thinking of stresses on the body. So the stresses that we've covered so far include the blood sugar dysregulation, the metabolic dysregulation, the thyroid, the gut, the intestinal permeability, being bombarded with medications, the liver. Another thing to add to the equation of things going wrong, things going awry, would be toxins, and that can include heavy metals. And so absolutely, the hair tissue mineral analysis is really informative, actually, because it helps us to understand whether there might be any of those things going on. And sometimes we look at those hair tests and it's like, whoa, like, you've got a whole lot of, like, lead going on, for example, or whatever it might be. And now once we know that, then we can be figuring out, okay, A, where is that coming from? And B, can we be putting anything in to help to drag those metals out of the body? But, it's just like all of the other things. It's the body feeling under threat. And if the body is feeling under threat from heavy metals, which cause this oxidative stress, impact our nutrient absorption, impact our gut function, then of course, by proxy, the cholesterol is going to become out of balance as well.
Yeah, like looking at binders and more to help move that out of the body and help with detox.
That's right.
Yeah, and then so the genetic piece of this. Sometimes we have a family history of cholesterol issues, and we may feel that we're doomed. We've got a higher risk of heart attack or stroke. So what are some supportive measures there, and really that epigenetics piece where diet and lifestyle, was it genetics loads the gun, but diet and lifestyle will pull the trigger. So it's not, even though you have a genetic predisposition, it doesn't mean this is your destiny. Anything you wanted to say there?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, Sarah, because actually my dad is a classic example of this. And so my dad's dad died young. So my paternal grandfather died when he was in his 40s. And so my dad has always been terrified that the same thing is going to happen to him. And so my dad's a classic example of someone who went to the GP. They started showing all of these signs of the blood pressure being high, the cholesterol being high, got put on all the medications, and he, like many people, just kind of went along with that. And so he's on all of these medications, and now he suffers because he's got all of the side effects from all of the medications. He's knackered every day, and he has all the muscle ache and everything else. But but he's in his late 70s now. It's like, dude, you're doing well. Like the genes don't mean that is your fate. And yes, I think it can be really empowering to know your genetic status, whether you've actually had your genes tested or whether you are just going by the family history, because cardiovascular disease is strongly implicated in family history, just like things like PCOS as well, right? But it doesn't mean that you're doomed. It just means, okay, I know that I'm susceptible to this. Therefore, let's make sure that I'm getting the diet right. Let's make sure that I'm not exposing myself to too many toxins. Let's make sure that one thing that we haven't mentioned it already is stress, which is huge for mental and emotional stress. That's a huge driver for cholesterol being out of balance as well, and for hypertension and cardiovascular disease in general. So all of those things put together are to say, okay, well, I've got this information, I know I've got that loaded gun, but let's just put that loaded gun in the cupboard and grow some grass on it or something, and not ever let that gun go off. So it's totally possible to use diet and lifestyle to control those things.
Absolutely. And then so some of the markers that we see for to really look for stroke or heart attack, you talk about high homocysteine and then high C-reactive protein. These are some of the markers that we asked for on our blood chemistry review.
Yeah, and they so coming back to this principle of inflammation. So inflammation is a term that gets bandied around a lot nowadays, and I know that when I talk to people about inflammation, when I talk to clients about inflammation, lots of people don't really understand what it means. But inflammation is a process that happens naturally in the body. It absolutely has a place in the body because it's part of our immune system. It helps us to heal. So if we were to have an injury or some kind of acute infection, like COVID, for example, then we do want a degree of inflammation because we want our white blood cells to flood to that area and for that to facilitate healing. So it's there for a reason. But what inflammation hasn't caught up with is the modern lifestyle, where we are barraged with all sorts of things that we never were meant to be exposed to, whether that is metals, plastics, sugar, stress, all of the above, all the things that we've spoken about today. And so when our bodies are barraged with all of those things, then it can drive inflammation up. And what happens when we see chronic inflammation is that then becomes a risk factor. So I'd be more worried about someone if they came to me with lots of markers of elevated inflammation than I would if someone just had a family history of cardiovascular disease.
Okay, so let's finish off here and we'll talk about sort of the diet and lifestyle recommendations. We've talked about olive oil, making sure it's extra virgin, eating, so fiber, so eating from the rainbow. What about berberine? Do you have any thoughts on that one?
So I do like berberine. I also like plant sterols are one of my one of my faves for particularly for helping to get those cholesterol markers back in balance. What else do I love for this kind of thing? Oh, just like thinking about the blood sugar piece, right? And so, like, yes, making sure there's enough fiber in the diet, but also just making sure that you've got enough protein, because once your blood sugars start to rise and fall dramatically, it's often because there's just not enough protein in the diet. So making sure that you've got enough good quality protein is really important. But also just working to reduce inflammation. So you can get some like nice anti-inflammatory herbs. So like turmeric or curcumin would be the active form. But using those, even just using culinary herbs can be a really lovely idea, you know. And so for turmeric, for example, if you were using turmeric in food, you can, to help activate the curcumin, you could add a load of black pepper to it to help activate the active ingredient in there. And when you're eating fruits and vegetables, within reason, always try to eat the skin as well, because the skin is where most of the fiber is. And when we're thinking about fiber, you have soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. So insoluble fiber is more like roughage, so it's kind of like the bulk from plant foods that helps to drag things through the digestive tract, and insoluble fiber is just as important as well. So insoluble fiber would be like pectin, for example, from apple skins is a really lovely source of soluble fiber. And if you are increasing your fiber intake, always make sure that you're increasing your water intake as well, because otherwise it can have the opposite effect and just make things really bunged up.
And there's a recipe on my blog, fabfertile.com, with golden milk. So talking about the turmeric and then adding the black pepper, which is kind of nice. Anything else on, we talked about, avocados and nuts, and like we added nuts and seeds too with the healthy fats. Anything else?
And just oily fish as well is a really, really great one. So we when we're thinking about oily fish, we're using the acronym SMASH. So to remember it, so it's the sardine, mackerel, anchovies, salmon, and herring. So those would be the oiliest fish. But just bearing in mind as well, again, we always need balance. So if you were to eat oily fish every single day, then it may be that you're then exposed to a bit more mercury than what we would like to see. So it's just always getting that balance. But typically speaking, if you're having a good, a well-sourced form of oily fish 2 to 3 times a week, then that is going to be anti-inflammatory in nature.
So SMASH. So that was the first one?
Salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and herring.
There you go. I like all those. I know some people get a little scared of the anchovies and a little scared of the sardines, but
sardines are great because they're so small. They're lower down the food chain, so they're less likely to be contaminated with mercury compared to some of the bigger ones like salmon.
Yeah, my mom always made me sardine sandwiches growing up. So yeah, I was a little bit teased for that, but they were yummy. Any final thoughts on this, Katy?
I guess it's just this overall reminder that if you have one set of markers that is out of balance, it's definitely not something to freak out about. It's just something to say, okay, let's do some digging. Let's find out what's not quite going right in the body. Let's listen to the signs that our body is giving us and work on those. So it's absolutely something to feel empowered by rather than freaked out about.
Agree. It's sort of knowledge is power, not like that noodling down and losing your mind with things, because we see a lot of people over researching. It's what are these markers telling us? What is all the themes that we're seeing, and to really know that there's not to focus on that diagnosis. There's things that have been missed, healing opportunities. And if someone else can get pregnant with a similar thing that you had to you, it's possible for you to get pregnant as well naturally. Or if you need to go to IVF to get pregnant with your own eggs. So thanks again, Katy, for coming on. And
Thank you for having me.
yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Cheers.